Namaste and welcome to the Festival of Bharat. I am your host Kamal Madi Shetty. Today I have the good fortune of hosting a very special guest, Benny Tilman ji, also known as Balabhadra Bhattacharya Dasaji. He is the current president of the Vedic Friends Association and is also the first African American president of the organization. He is a direct disciple of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ji. Namaste, Benny ji, and welcome to the Festival of Bharat.
Hare Krishna, Kamalji. Please accept my humble greetings and thank you for inviting me to participate. Very excited about this.
Hare Krishna, Guruji, and thank you so much for joining me today on our platform. Guruji, if I may begin this conversation by asking you about your own life. Could you please share your life journey, where you grew up, and how were you introduced to Sanatan Dharma?
Well, before I begin, I'll just say a couple of prayers, auspicious prayers to create the right environment. First prayers are to my spiritual master and all the acharyas and spiritual masters in the line of succession coming all the way back from Sri Krishna. Because it says in Srimad Bhagavad that Krishna gave this knowledge, Vedanta, to Lord Brahma. Tene Brahma Hridaya Adhikaviye. So he gave it to him in the beginning. But it's been passed down, decade after decade, century after century, to presently in our line, coming from Brahma, my spiritual master was the main personality in that line that we all came in contact with. So to him, Om Ajnana Timirandasya Janan Janan Salakaya Chak Umilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadate Swapadante Kam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Itinamane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gaudavani Pacharane Vishesha Shunyavadi Paschachare Satarane Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Go Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. And one quick prayer that my guru used to say, Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, Sarve Shantu Niramaya, Sarve Badrani Pasyantu, Ma Kaschit Dukkha Bhagavet. Om Shanti, 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 Shanti. May all be prosperous and happy. May all be free from illness. May all see what is spiritually uplifting. May no one suffer. Om, peace, peace, peace. So with that, as you ask me, I'll try to describe my 70 years in brief, because I just turned 70 years old last year. I know we had Jeffrey Armstrong's birthday. He turned 75, so I'm just a little behind him. So I was born in 1951. In a city called East Point, which is 10 minutes from Atlanta downtown. And this was during the 50s, where my growing as a young person, a child. And during that time, African Americans were known as colored. I think they also used that term in South Africa, colored people. So as a child, that's how I identified myself, as a colored person. And then later on, as things became more progressive in the Black community, we were known as Negroes. And then became Black, and then now we're African Americans. Of course, we'll discuss that in a few moments about who we really are. So when I grew up in the 50s, it was a very nice time for me as a child. The neighborhood was quite interesting. In fact, the first time I went to India, especially in Calcutta, it felt like home. It really did, because in my community, it was a thriving community, businesses, people everywhere, no fear, no violence. It was just wonderful. Then in my teenage years, starting in the 60s, is when I developed a desire to do music. And that was pushed on by my mother, who's like, I consider my first guru. My mother was my first guru. So she helped me get started in that. So within the 60s, and most people who have studied the history of America know that the 60s was the revolutionary time. That's when the hippies came on the scene, and all the poets and the beat poets and all that. So I got involved in all of that activity, and became pretty much a well-known musician in the Atlanta area, first in the Black or African-American music scene, and then in the quote-unquote rock and roll scene. And I was playing with a band locally. and became quite famous in that area. And then after that, I moved to Florida with this band. I didn't go to college. Directly after high school, my only focus was success in music. In fact, the day I received my diploma, I didn't go to the graduation, jumped in a car, drove to Florida, started playing with the band. But then in 1971, my father died. My mother died in 1970. My father died in 1971. And then my older brother died within that same time frame. So the reason I'm bringing all that up is that starting as a child, I was a Christian, brought up as a Christian. But at the age of 12, I decided I was not satisfied with Christian philosophy, some aspects. Now that's a 12-year-old child in a poor, Black community. I don't know how I had that thought. I had one question that nobody could answer. And that question was, where did God come from? Because in the Bible, it says God created heaven, God created earth. He stepped there and created. So I was wondering, where did he come from? No one could answer. So I lost interest in that. So in 1970, 71, after my mother died, especially because she was my first guru, I was distraught. I was confused, didn't know what to do. And then my father died and all of that. So I was living in Florida. I came back to Atlanta. And when I came back to Atlanta, I started singing with a local African-American group who also became quite famous. But during that time is when I met Maharishi Mahesh Yogi from Transcendental Meditation. Not him directly, but his students and teachers in Atlanta. So I became very interested because I couldn't understand why my mother died, my father died, and my brother died. It just somehow didn't register properly. So then I started hearing about Eastern philosophy. I had never heard about India. I mean, even in school, we didn't talk about India. The only thing I knew about India was the caste system. I remember in the third grade somewhere we read that. That's all I knew. So then when I came in contact with Transcendental Meditation, something opened up, some new vista, some hope of a higher realm of consciousness. And then when I met Maharishi himself in 1972, I believe, in Atlanta, I didn't feel that connection. I was interested in the philosophy, but the connection didn't happen. And then shortly after that is when I came in contact with Bhagavad-gita and Swami A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, my guru, and that sealed the deal, as you might say. Once I heard Bhagavad-gita, once I heard the philosophy from Bhagavad-gita, everything changed. So I started coming to the Atlanta Hare Krishna Temple in 1972. In fact, it's funny, I was working in an area called, it was 13th and Peachtree. Whoever's been to Atlanta, you've heard of Peachtree. So I was working at the corner of 14th and Peachtree. And the temple was located on 13th Street. Just imagine. So I started going to the temple every day from work, at lunchtime, after work, anytime I could go. It was so wonderful. I think Krishna must have arranged that. I came in contact. So I joined the temple after coming for about a year, doing my study and research about this culture and philosophy, because I was not familiar. So I had to make sure it was the right thing. So I moved in the Atlanta temple in October of 1973, and I've been involved in the movement since that time. I later on became the temple president for the Atlanta temple for 18 years. I served as the president there. Before that as vice president, before that as different leadership positions. And then within the last decade, I've served as the president of the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania temple for 6 years. I just retired a couple of months ago. I'm still the chairman of the board. And within that time frame, I became the president of Vedic Friends Association, which you mentioned in the beginning. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but that has been a wonderful experience. It's given me a platform to bring what I understand from Krishna consciousness with the basic idea of Vedic culture, Sanatan Dharma, in a way which is not threatening to people. They don't have to think, oh, I have to become a Hare Krishna to listen to Bhagavad-gita. You don't. But that process of bringing the Vedic culture and Western culture has been a great experience for me. I really have enjoyed it. So that's, in brief, my life as a person in the material world, and then coming to this Sanatan Dharma culture.
Thank you so much, Guruji, for sharing that journey with us. It is so inspiring to listen to that, and I have many more questions for you, based on that as well. Guruji, for the uninitiated, how would you describe Sanatan Dharma, especially to our young brothers and sisters, be it in the US or even in India these days?
Yeah, well, there's so much information about it, and there's an acronym. You may have heard it. It's KISS. Now, normally they say that means keep it simple, stupid. I don't use that uh, explanation. I say KISS, keep it simple, sadhus. Because the problem that sadhus generally have is so complicated. They make the Vedic philosophy so amazingly transcendental and grandiose that people can't follow it sometimes. The terminology, the Sanskrit words, so many things, it's confusing, especially for our young generation. I don't know about India that much in terms of the exposure of young people in India to this culture, but I know in the West, because they've grown up in the West, they've gone to school in the West, their friends are in the West, they may not identify with all of that. So when we talk about Dharma, we have to break it down in very simple terminology. In the Srimad Bhagavad, it says, Savai Pumsam Paro Dharmo, Yato Bhaktir Adoksaje, Ahaitu Kya Prati Hata, Yayatma Suprasidati. So the translation, the supreme occupation, Dharma, for all humanity is that by which men can attain to loving devotional service and to the transcendent Lord. Such devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted to completely satisfy the self. So this term Dharma, and I'm sure our dear friend and co-founder of Vedic Friends, Jeffrey Armstrong Kavindra Rishi, he's done so much research in terms of linguistic sciences, and he understands these things from a linguistic perspective. And he's actually presenting some books in the near future that will help shine a lot of light on these words like Dharma. But in simple terminology, Dharma is that unchangeable principle of a thing. For instance, water. The unchanging principle of water is liquidity. It flows. When water becomes solid, it's no longer called water, it's called ice. Ice is cold and it's hard. So anything like that, you find this unchangeable principle. So what is the unchangeable principle of us? Because we're talking about Dharma. We're not talking about animals. We're talking about basically human beings. So who are we? In Bhagavad-gita, it says we're not the physical body. Okay, we think we're the body. You're from India, I'm from America, I'm black, you're Indian. All those things are illusion. It's almost like saying 1 + 1 is 10. Wrong. So if you calculate from a wrong estimation, everything after that is wrong. So if we start off with the equation, we are this body, then everything after that, meaning societies that we build, relationships that we build, everything is off. It's just off. So Dharma means, what is that principle? There's another way of looking at it from the Vedic perspective. It's called Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana. Sambandha means that relationship, but with who? Sambandha, Abhideya. Abhideya means that activity within that relationship. Once you realize there is a relationship. And Prayojana means that ultimate goal, that ultimate destination. So starting from the beginning, who are we? Once we figure that out, then what relationships do I have? I have many temporary relationships, but is there an eternal relationship? That eternal relationship, as this verse is saying, is in relationship to God. Now, that's a big discussion because people have different views about God. But from our Sanatan Dharma perspective, we see Bhagwan. And from the Vaishnava perspective, we see Krishna. Of course, different persons see God in different ways. Ram, Sringa, Varaha, all different incarnations, Das Avatar. But according to Srimad Bhagavatam, which is one of the most respected scriptures, it says, Krishna's to Bhagavan Swayam. Krishna's to Bhagavan Swayam. Krishna is the original Bhagavan. So that's something we can discuss a little bit more. So for our young people, don't be intimidated by this philosophy to the point that you feel like it's just not for you. Find the simplest explanation you can so you can get a grounding, like a foundation. All the sophisticated aspects of the philosophy can come after you have the foundation. So I'm suggesting that the first part of the foundation for you to understand Dharma is to understand yourself as a spiritual being and that you have an eternal relationship with the Supreme Godhead. And believe me, God has many manifestations. So don't worry about which one you're attracted to. Some people are attracted to Ram, some people are attracted to whatever. Don't worry about that. Just know that you have an eternal relationship with someone who's supplying everything you need. Think about that for a second. Everything you need outside of a computer or a nice car or a house, that's different. But all those real things, food, water, air, and air you don't pay for. It's incredible. One of the things you need the most, you're not even paying for it, but it's being supplied to you every day. It's not by the government, it's by the grace of the Lord. So those are the beginning understandings of Dharma. Again, I'm saying to the second generation especially, and also to the older generation, don't be intimidated by the vastness of this Vedic philosophy. I've been studying for almost 50 years, and every day, and I'm not exaggerating, I get newer and newer realizations. So we're going to talk about that in a few minutes when we talk about the toolbox concept that I talk about all the time. So that's one way of looking at it. So thank you for that question, Kamal.
Thank you, Guruji. I think that's a very comprehensive answer, and it's very insightful. In India, Guruji, you often hear young people say that they don't believe in religion, or they're not interested in religion because it doesn't encourage questioning. But this is clearly not the case as far as Sanatan Dharma is concerned. Can you explain, Guruji, for the benefit of our viewers, how our culture is actually a very natural fit for anyone who is curious and inquisitive?
Yeah, as I said about, when I spoke about my history, because I had questions and nobody wanted to answer. I asked the ministers and they said, no, you don't need to know that. Just believe in Jesus. I said, wait a minute. I have a question here. No, you don't need. And that's one of the reasons I left Christianity basically officially at the age of 12. But then when I came in contact with this philosophy, and especially in the Bhagavad-gita, we're going to refer to Bhagavad-gita quite a bit. And don't mind me looking down because I have a lot of notes. You don't have a great memory as you get older. So I make sure I have the notes in front of me. But this verse in Bhagavad-gita, 4th chapter, and in the beginning of the 4th chapter, I believe verse number 2, the Lord Krishna says to Arjuna that this science has been passed down. It's been coming down. Evam parampara praptam imam rajashayo vidhu sakalenina mahata yoganastaparant. So that great science is coming down in a line of teachers, parampara. And then in the 34th verse of the same chapter, specifically referring to what you just said about, young people having questions and not understanding whether or not it's acceptable in the culture of Sanatan Dharma. This is over 5,000 years ago when Krishna spoke Bhagavad-gita. And he says, Tadvidi pranipatena pariprasnena sevaya upatek shantite jnanam jnaninas tatra darshinaha. Just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. So that's part one. Learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. And the spiritual master can be any person who has this knowledge to a large degree. It can also be a woman as well. Like I said, my mother is my first guru, seriously. And she didn't speak a lot, but she showed by example. So then it goes on to say, inquire from him. How can you say that there's no inquiry in the culture when Krishna's saying, inquire from him? But he gives one caveat, one part that you should employ in inquiring. He said, inquire from him submissively. Submissively. Now, I always try to connect concepts that are here, somewhat abstract, to your personal experience. It's like when you go to school, what's the best way to learn? Just visualize, okay, you go to the university, you're spending rupees and thousands of US dollars or whatever pounds. You're going there to learn. And you walk in the first day, listen, Mr. Teacher, I'm going to tell you what you're teaching today. What? Have you lost your mind? It's better to go in and say, yes, Mr. Such and such, happy to meet you and thank you for teaching and guiding me. That's called submissive. So that's what Krishna told Arjuna. Inquire, but submissively. Challenging is not good. You can ask challenging questions, but don't challenge. Ask the questions for clarification. And throughout the Bhagavad-gita, it's incredible. There's questions and answers. So how can anyone say it's not part of our culture? The whole Bhagavad-gita is Arjuna giving his arguments in the first chapter, and his arguments are all valid. He's saying, you want me to fight my cousins? You want me to fight my teacher? You want me to fight my guru? What are you saying, Krishna? Please explain. And then Arjun gave the really wonderful platform. He said, now I'm confused about my dharma, my duty. Please instruct me. See, submissive. Please instruct me. I'm confused. I don't know the purpose of life. You please instruct me. And then the first instruction Krishna really gives is verse number 13 of the second chapter. Dehi no asmin yata dehe kaumaram yovanam jara tata dehantara praptir dhirastatra muyati. So he says the embodied soul is passing through this body from boyhood, youth to old age. And then at the end, the soul passes on. So he's saying we're not the body. That's the first lesson. Arjun, you have a misunderstanding. So my point is that questions are the way to understand anything. You should definitely question. And if you find that the person you're inquiring from is not amenable to answering your questions, then you need to find a different person. Also, the person you're asking questions of should be humble enough to say, I'm not sure about the answer to that particular question. I will study it for you, and then we'll come back and we'll discuss later on. See, that's how gurus should really work. No one should act like I know everything, because you don't know everything. And later on in the Bhagavad-gita chapter 10, there's a phrase in one verse, Te sam satatayuktanam bhajitam priti purvakam dada ami buddhi yogam tam. And Krishna is saying, I give you the understanding. But then you might say, well, that's only for people who believe in Krishna. No. In the 15th chapter, Krishna explains in verse 15, Sarvasya chaham hridhi shani visto mata smitir jnanam apohanam cha. He's saying, I give knowledge, forgetfulness, and remembrance to everyone. To everyone. So the guru should be as astute as possible in the knowledge, but sometimes a guru can just show you by example. It's not about how many words, how many slokas, how many stories from the Vedas. It might just be by his example. Again, as in the case of my dear mother, she was a college-educated person. She was a teacher, but she didn't tell me a lot of things. She just showed me. And I walked in her footsteps, trying to follow her example of humility. This is real quick, a really important statement. I have to do it very quickly. But in the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad-gita, verses 8 through 12, it begins with amanitvam as the principles of knowledge. And the first principle of knowledge is humility, amanitvam. So make sure you ask questions of the right person in a submissive, humble manner. And then you might ask me, well, what do you mean by humble? My guru says humility means not being anxious for the satisfaction of being honored by others. And be warned, because I've been around for 70 years, you're not going to always be honored by others. So you might as well get used to it. You might as well calm down and accept it and stay focused. So humility, submissiveness, intelligent inquiry, you must do that. Otherwise, how you understand? Sometimes, especially young Indians, students or young adults, they will say, I learned it from my grandma. I learned it from my grandpa. I saw it in the village, but they never took the time to go and study a little bit. So please try to find a source that you can approach humbly and ask any question that you might have. When I first got involved in this, because I didn't know much about it, I would call the temple at least 5 to 7 times a day with many, 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 many questions. And to the most part, they were answered nicely. So that's my encouragement to the next generation. Be open-minded, know that this culture embraces questioning, and do it.
Very, very insightful, Guruji. I think the spirit of questioning and inquiry, when done in the right way, I think it can go a long way in our spiritual journeys. And I think you've described the whole process very beautifully for us. Guruji, you mentioned Srimad Bhagavad-gita, and for all of our wonderful scriptures, what makes the Gita so special? And as you mentioned, you've often talked about how it serves as a toolbox for us, navigating the many ups and downs of our lives. Why do you say so?
I started using that term in a lecture I gave at the Philadelphia Temple, maybe 3 years ago. It just dawned upon me that people are not prepared to deal with life. Visualize just like, I hope there's no noise coming from outside because there's construction people working on the roof of one of my neighbor's houses. And you hear the tap, tap, tap of the gun. You hear the pump, pump, pump of this and the pump, pump. They have all the machinery. They have trucks all lined out in front of my house. They came prepared to put a new roof on. They're almost finished. They started early. They're almost done. Can you imagine if they drove up with no tools? I mean, they'd be there for days trying to figure it out. And on top of that, I can almost guarantee, because I used to do construction when I was in high school, you look at your tools before you go to the job site. Okay? So now we're in this field of life, this yantra rudrani, this machine made of material energy, this field. Chaitra gya. Chaitra means the field, gya means the one who knows it. So here we are. Are we prepared to deal with this? Because the complexities of life, they're all coming at us. That's what happened to Arjuna. The perplexities, the complexities, they confused him. And at that point, although Arjuna is a pure devotee of Krishna, he travels with Krishna in all different universes. But by Krishna's grace, he was put into a state where he acted like he didn't know. Internally, spiritually, he knew. Externally, he didn't. So Krishna started giving him knowledge / tools, TOOLS. Knowledge, these are the tools. So when I say Bhagavad-gita is my toolbox, because I can point to Bhagavad-gita for every aspect of my life and yours. If someone asked me a particular question, like yesterday, a young Indian person, he was asking me questions about marriage because he considers me like an uncle like that. So I was explaining to him from Bhagavad-gita, and we were discussing back and forth. It was very, very nice. So what everyone needs to understand is that the Gita is not just an esoteric literature. It's a theistic science. Srila Prabhupada, the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, my guru, in the very first verse of the Bhagavad-gita, which is described Bhagavad-gita as it is, that's the one that he translated, Bhagavad-gita as it is. If you go to that book, you go to the first slok, first chapter, first sloka, Dhritarashtra Uvacha, all of that, go down to the commentary. The first part of the commentary says, Bhagavad-gita is a widely read theistic science summarized in the Gita Mahatmya, wherein it says one should study Bhagavad-gita scrutinizingly. Go look that word up sometimes. Scrutinizingly, with the help of a devotee of Krishna. Wow. So then when you do it like that, then that person can show you the various tools, which are verses, concepts. One of the most important ones for me, and I had to share this with a 9-year-old girl the other day who just started back in school, and she was having problems with bullies, and she was starting to see people as Latino and Black and all these different things. So I sat her down. I said, listen to this. I said, you go get the Bhagavad-gita. She said, yes, Prabhu. Find chapter 5, verse 18. Yes, Prabhu. I said, come back and read it. And this is what it says. Vidya vinaya sampane brahmane gavi hastini shuni chaiva supakecha pandita samadarshana. Translation: the humble sages, by virtue of true knowledge, see with equal vision a learned and gentle brahmana, a cow, and an elephant, a dog, and a dog eater. So when she thought about it, I said, so what's your understanding? She said, I guess everybody is the same. I said, yeah, you're right. Don't see differences. So that's a practical. And I think one of my most favorite verses is 3rd chapter, text 21. I may forget some of the Sanskrit. Yad yad acharati shrestha tat tat evetarojuna. So that verse is saying yad yad acharya. Acharya means teacher by example. Krishna says in that verse, basic translation, whatever a great man does, common men follow in his footsteps. Whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. So that one thing, that one verse, that one tool, I have used that in many secular settings. I forgot to mention, I was a chairman of an interfaith group for about 15 years that included Muslims, Christians, Jews. Everyone was there. Different swamis, pastors. So I would present that verse a lot of times. I remember one time at a school board meeting that we were invited to be part of. And then I quoted that. And I'm not exaggerating. Many of the people said, Mr. Tillman, what is that, what you just said? Can I write it down? It didn't say Krishna. It didn't say Dharma. It didn't say Sanatan Dharma. It didn't say anything about Hinduism. It's just knowledge. What I'm trying to get at is that Bhagavad-gita is not just about religion. It's a theistic science, okay, as Prabhupada said in the beginning. So you can see in science, there's experimentation, observation, repeat the same thing, make sure it happens consistently, like you mentioned about being an engineer. So you got to look at things carefully. So when you apply this philosophy and you see it work, then you get what's called in the 18th chapter, Jnana Vijnana. Jnana means knowledge. Like I think that's one of the points that we were going to talk about in a minute. But Vijnan means the practical application of the knowledge, which becomes wisdom. Those who are wise lament neither for the living nor the dead. That's what Krishna told Arjuna. Those who are wise lament neither for the living nor the dead. You have to be wise. That's called Vijnan. So that is the great aspect of Bhagavad Gita. It's practical, especially again to our young adults and young people. Even like I said, that girl she's 9 years old, and she could understand after studying a little bit of Bhagavad Gita. So if you see it from that perspective, and use that example, that visual of a toolbox. What's in your toolbox? What's in there? Put some verses in there. Now, I don't just have Bhagavad Gita verses in my toolbox. I have many examples. I'll give you a good example. Sometimes people complain a lot, right? Oh, this thing, that thing, I wish I had this. So here's one tool that's in my box. It's a funny little statement. I used to complain about not having shoes until I met a man that had no feet. So let that, think about that for a second. I'm complaining about no shoes. This man has no feet. I'm in much better position. So those are little tools that I keep in my toolbox, all kinds of things, all kinds of statements. I even wrote one quote myself, and it says, you have a right to your opinion, but it doesn't mean your opinion is always right. That's in my toolbox. And I pull it out when I start thinking I'm always right. I said, no, you have a right for your opinion, but it doesn't mean you're right. So be humble in conversation, in trying to share. Be willing to listen. I was just telling someone that yesterday. Make sure you listen to the person, because the devotee was saying, well, that person was a Christian. They were saying this and saying that. I said, that's fine. You listen to them and you find where you can connect what they're thinking with Bhagavad Gita. And then they feel, wow, your book has value. I'll finish by saying this. If you can't show value in Bhagavad Gita, who's going to listen to you other than Vedic scholars? Yeah, Vedic scholars will sit all day and talk about the Sanskrit and the this and that. But if the general mass of people is our target, our meaning Sanatan Dharma followers, if that's our target, not just the inner circle, but the greater circle, then we have to find a way to explain this philosophy so they can understand. And those are the things you need to keep in your toolbox. So I hope that helped a little bit.
Absolutely, Guruji. It's so amazing what the Bhagavad Gita can do for our lives, and also help us really navigate the many twists and turns that we face and the situations that we face on a daily basis.
Yes, yes.
Guruji, moving to the next question of this very fascinating conversation. When we look at the Bhagavad Gita and also look at the larger world around us, how do you think the teachings in the Gita and the Gyan of Dharma as a whole can help the world in general be a better place?
I'm glad you asked that. And as I was thinking about that, I couldn't help but think about this organization that I'm working with, a president of now, Vedic Friends Association, because we have many, many discussions about this. Are we being relevant to the world situation? The goal of the Vedic Friends Association is to protect Dharma and to promote Dharma, and to do it in such a way that people can understand it. We have many, dialogues and presentations on Zoom and various media. Of course, we've had Jeffrey Armstrong there, Kavindra Rishi, Stephen Knapp, Sri Nandanandana, and one of our founding leaders, David Frawley, and many other speakers have come to share that wisdom. And we also call that session Tools for Human Empowerment. And we took some time to look at those words, tools for human empowerment. And the last word, the operative, empowerment. So we want people to feel inspired by this philosophy and by this culture. And Bhagavad-gita, again, as I said earlier, it's not just a religious book. In fact, it's not a religious book. Religion, today I'm a Christian, tomorrow I'm a Muslim, the next day I'm a Jewish. I recently spoke at the largest gathering of Catholic scholars in America. I was on a panel of two other African Americans. One was a Black Jewish lady. The other was a good friend of mine who's a Muslim scholar, very respected gentleman, went to Harvard University. And we were there speaking. And I just spoke from Bhagavad-gita, and people were appreciating. These are all Catholic scholars from all over the country, PhDs. I don't have a PhD, but I understand this philosophy, and I presented it in such a way they were able to appreciate it. So our Vedic philosophy is practical, number one. You just have to start practicing it, putting it into your life incrementally. Don't do too much too soon. Incrementally add the principles of Vedanta to your life, and then you'll see that this Gyan that we're talking about, as I mentioned earlier, Gyan becomes Vigyan when you apply it. Just gathering knowledge, categorizing it is fine, but now you have to take it and put it into practice. That's the great advantage of Bhagavad-gita, because it's spoken on the battlefield. Here's another way to put it into practical perspective. It's spoken on the battlefield. You don't have to leave your job. You don't have to leave your family. You don't have to leave anything. You just add. So Krishna tells Arjuna, you continue the fight. Now, make note that the fight that Arjuna had to participate in, I've seen two estimates. 640 million men died, up to 1 billion died in Kurukshetra, except for some, the Pandavas and so on and so forth. So this is what Arjuna had to go back and do after hearing the Bhagavad-gita. So some people are intimidated. If I give my heart to Bhagavad-gita, won't I become like a sadhu and go away in the forest and go live in a cave? Krishna tells Arjuna, if you do that, Arjuna, then you will be criticized. Everyone will criticize you because you've been respected by Lord Shiva. And on top of that, you're my devotee. People will not respect you if you go away from the battle. Better you stay in the battle, stay at your job, stay with your family, stay in your school, whatever it is you're doing. Like for me, I was in a band, okay, a nightclub late at night, but I was reading Bhagavad-gita. So no one told me, oh, Benny, you can't go to the club anymore. They said, no, Benny, read Bhagavad-gita. And that gradually brought me to a higher level. So Bhagavad-gita and the Gyan, the knowledge that's there, it is practical. That's why Prabhupada said in the beginning, learn Bhagavad-gita with the help of a devotee. What does that mean? Someone who's applied it, someone who's seen the truth. It doesn't mean they've seen Krishna playing his flute, dancing with Radha and all that. They have understood the truth by practical application. And then you'll begin to understand the beauty of Bhagavad-gita. There are some verses, Gita Mahatmya, that explain Bhagavad-gita in such a beautiful way. My spiritual master there's like 108 little points that he made about the beauty of Bhagavad-gita. So those things are available. So.
Thank you, Guruji, for sharing that. It's so amazing. Guruji, you've spoken about and you've dealt with how young people approach these subjects. I wanted to get a message from you to young Indians and young viewers from across the world who might be watching this. But as somebody who lives in India, I can see that a lot of times many young Indians are disconnected from their dharmic roots.
Yes.
So what would your message be to them about reassessing the majesty, the science, and the compassion and the wisdom of Dharma?
Yeah, and I'm going to connect this to, I believe, another question you have at the end. There's a verse in what's called the Chaitanya Charitamrita. The literal translation is the nectar of the living force in immortality, our functioning dharma in the immortal, eternal existence. But it says, specifically to those born in India, I'm speaking specifically to all my brothers and sisters born in India. Bharata Bhumite Haila. Manusya Janma Yar. Janma Sartaka Kari Kara Para Upakar. Translation. One who has taken his birth as a human being in the land of India, Bharat Varsha. We'll get into that discussion maybe another time about India, Bharat. India, Bharat Varsha, should make his life successful and work for the benefit of all other people. That is the message to not only this generation and the next generation, but the previous generations, especially from India. India, in my humble opinion, has missed a couple of opportunities. I'll give you an example. Let me ask the question first. When was the last time you, Kamal, saw an Indian sadhu, a saintly person, being interviewed on CNN or Fox News?
Cannot recollect any.
You can't even remember.
Yeah.
The last person I remember from any one of these traditions being interviewed on major television was myself.
Okay.
When our previous president, Donald Trump, was elected, in Atlanta, the news agencies were going around asking people what they thought. Now, I go downtown Atlanta every week on Friday with some devotees. We sit down, we chant Hare Krishna, we give people prasadam, we give people Bhagavad-gita. I mean, dozens of Bhagavad-gitas every time. So we were doing that one day, and this television station, one of the three main stations in Atlanta, drove up, stopped in the middle of the street, ran over to me. Sir, can we ask you what your opinion is of the new president? I said, sure, no problem. So they put the microphone and all that. And then that's the last time since how many years? 5 years, 6 years? That I've seen anyone from our culture being interviewed. That means, in one sense, not to be critical, are we relevant? Everyone else is on TV, all these different views, Republican, Democrat, atheist, whatever. Why not us? So our young people, why would they be proud of a culture that's not even taken seriously? What should we do to make our culture more applicable? So the things I say we've missed, the vegetarian movement. Generally, it takes a little bit of twisting and turning, mentally to get people to realize that the vegetarian culture comes out of India. It didn't come out of Africa or Europe. It came out of India. Iceland, all those places came out of India. So that is a booming industry. I just saw an article the other day, one of my favorite actors, Kevin Hart. Some of you may have heard of him. It's a very funny guy. So he is building a chain of vegan restaurants to rival McDonald's. Now, in America and around the world, McDonald's is a name that everyone knows. So here's this person trying to start a chain of vegan restaurants. And I'm thinking, why haven't we done that? As a Sanatan Dharma culture, this is our asset. Plant-based diets, that's our asset, but we're not using it. And the other thing is yoga. I mean, I've asked this question to so many people. Where do you think yoga came from? Well, New York, Los Angeles? No, India, the sadhus, the saintly persons, they're still there in the Himalayan mountains doing yoga. It came from us. But I don't think there are many in America. I know, and I've done a little research. There are not many Indian-owned yoga studios. And I'm like, wow. Most of the yogis that you see are American. I'm thinking that's pretty interesting. So you were born in India, you have the culture, you have the philosophy, you have all the assets, but are we using them? Again, that's why I'm referring back to the Vedic Friends Association. We're trying to bring those assets back to the forefront. And my esteemed associate, Jeffrey Armstrong, he's working very hard to put together some knowledge in book form to help bring the interest back in our own culture. It's an amazing culture, wonderful culture. So yes, I would say to everyone, study that verse from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's from the Adi Leela, chapter 9:41. One who has taken his birth as a human being. We don't expect the animals to change the world. Human being in the land of Bharat Varsha should make his life successful and work for the benefit of all people. So what's the greatest benefit we can give people? An understanding of who they are. That's the essence of our philosophy. The very beginning of Bhagavad-gita, we're spiritual souls, we're not material bodies. So I hope that's a little helpful.
Absolutely, Guruji. It's so beautiful, and it's a great fortune for, I think, everybody who's born in this land. There's so much of wealth in terms of our heritage, in terms of our knowledge systems that we have inherited. and it's so important that we realize the value of it, so that we benefit ourselves, we benefit everybody around us, but the world in general.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Guruji, finally, I wanted to ask you, what are your views on the post 2014 Bharat? Many Indians believe that in some ways India actually gained independence more recently, not in 1947, because our country today appears to be finally on the path of civilizational reclamation, restitution. How do you view this from afar, and how do you see Prime Minister Modi as well, and also the very slow but sure-footed Indic renaissance that we at Cheti Media Network also represent?
Yeah, well, let me separate some of that. I was not so familiar with the point you made about the 2014 or 2014. So I looked at that a little bit and tried to put it in my mind to understand a little better. I understand about 1947 and all of that.
Yes.
So on that point about India's independence, my Guruji, my spiritual master, when he first met his spiritual master in 1922 in Calcutta. So my spiritual master was a business person at that time. He was starting some chemical program, some pharmacy. He was doing all these different things, building. He was married. He had a family. And he was also a follower of Gandhi. Prabhupada first was following Gandhi. And he was wearing the khadi, the clothing that symbolizes like, I'm following Gandhi. So when he met his guru, by his dress, he announced, I'm a follower of Gandhi. I'm looking for independence of India. So when he's speaking to his guru told him, you're an intelligent young man. You should take this knowledge and speak and take it into the English-speaking world. And Prabhupada, as a young man, was thinking, he just met me. He's telling me to go take this. What? What is he saying? I have to ask him some questions. So he started saying to Bhaktisiddhanta about India's independence. Who will listen to India, a dependent nation? But guess what his guru told him? This message is too important. It cannot wait for India's independence. This message needs to go out to the world. Prabhupada even wrote a letter to Gandhi saying to Gandhi, you are now on the world stage. Now present Bhagavad-gita. Don't worry about the politics. So in India, we have to be careful. Here's a quick example. You've heard of CNN, but you may not know who the founder of CNN is. And what is his name? My brain just went dead. What is the founder's name? I can't think of his name right now. It'll come to me in a second. Anyway, he was invited as a keynote speaker at a big Indian event in Atlanta. Okay, Ted Turner, that's his name. Ted Turner. You can look him up. He's the founder. So he started the whole 24-hour news cycle. So he was invited, and it was funny, at the place where I used to work, it was called Colony Square. So he was invited to speak. I was a known person in the Indian community, so they asked me to become, like a featured guest. And I'm sitting there listening to Ted Turner, wealthy billionaire. You know what he said to the Indian leaders? They were from all over Georgia and the South, hotel owners, business owners, everybody. He said, don't ruin your country. Don't follow our example. Our country is struggling with the moral issues and all these different issues. Don't follow that example. Now, on the other side of that, but in America and the Western countries, there is a lot of development. In India, there's a great deal of spiritualism, moral principles, things that are valuable for human life. What about marrying those two things together? We don't condemn the West, and we want to bring up our Indian culture, like you were saying, incrementally. We're making progress in this technical field and all those things, but that's not the real opulence of India. The real opulence of India is this culture, this Sanatan Dharma culture. But how do you bring that culture, which seems like it's millions or thousands of years old, into the current light of what's happening in the world? Again, my organization, Vedic Friends, that's exactly what we're focused on. And of course, Chiti Media. You guys have done a fantastic job of bringing scholars and persons who understand the culture and the history. Say, I don't have to do that work. You've already done that work. Okay? So if I want to study the history of India, I just turn on Chiti Media. And look, I was on your website the other day. I saw so many different videos that are available. I'm thinking, I don't have to go back and do all that. I can do what I do best, which is bringing this culture together with that culture in a respectful way so that both cultures benefit. You think America doesn't need the influence of our culture? Absolutely needs it. You think India doesn't need some help in some different areas of technology? Absolutely. One quick thing is my guru, he said, if Western people are expert in technological knowledge, and if their natural tendency is to develop it, let them do it. But as far as we Indians are concerned, our people are naturally inclined for spiritual elevation. Therefore, even in these days, also when there is Kumbh Mela at Prayag or any other place, or there is a particular function in some pilgrimage like Jagannath Puri, Brindavan, Hardwar, etc., millions of people gather without any advertising. So these natural tendencies should not be disturbed. But the people of a particular section of the world should develop their indigenous talent and then exchange with others. So that is the final thought I want to leave, is that we have our great culture. There are other cultures around the world. We should show the greatness of our culture, simultaneously accepting, whatever other people can share with us in our culture, Sanatan Dharma. So I hope that was helpful. And I really, really think that I'm blessed that you asked me to be part of this. Krishna is so kind. The Lord is so kind. My spiritual master is so kind. And you're also very kind to allow me to be here today. So thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Guruji. Thank you so much. It has been such an enriching conversation with you. You have shared your insights on, the various questions that we discussed, from, the significance of Bhagavad-gita in our lives, to the larger questions about, the world and how it can, have an impact on the society and the world around us. And also, like you mentioned, practically, the different ways in which we can apply the rich knowledge traditions that we have in our everyday lives to enhance, the life of our own life and also everybody else around us. Thank you so much, Guruji, for sharing your very enlightening thoughts and being with us today. And pranams to all your seva for the cause of Dharma and Vedic Vidya.
And if anyone has any further question, you can share my contact info. I'll be very happy to share with them. No problem. I'm a 24/7 person, so.
Thank you, Guruji. To our viewers, I would like to say, please do, if you have any questions, do share them with us. You can also put them as comments on this video. And we are very grateful to Guruji for taking out time and talking to us today on the Festival of Bharat. Namaskar, Guruji. Pranams.
Namaskar. Hare Krishna. Bye-bye. Take care.
Hare Krishna.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Chitti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.